Oh, my name is Mickey Munoz. I've been around surfing since I was 10 years old. First stood up in 1947 or 48 and got my first board in 49. And in winter of 50, I got my first real surfboard. And I've been standing ever since. And now for the last probably 12 or 13 or so years, I've gotten into stand-up paddling. I've crossed over to the dark side, but I love it, and it'll it'll give me another 20 or 30 years surfing, I'm sure. So, yeah, I've never lost my passion about surfing, and I've surfed all the way through. I'm now 77, so I've put in a pretty long time doing it. And but during that time, I've kind of run the gamut of say work. The restaurant business is a good one for surfing because a lot of times you can work at night. And so I started off, washing pots and pans and scrubbing floors and dishes and worked my way up to, bartender, waiter, waiting tables, manager, etc. Got interested in boats early on, and because I surfed Malibu, there was a lot of the surfers up there were multi-talented, and got into Malibu outriggers, which was a real interesting boat design, a multi-hull that was an outrigger, sailing outrigger, and so that was my first real sailing experience. And because I got into shaping and designing surfboards, because at the time I started surfing, there was not a surfboard industry. So, the few guys that shape boards would bring their balsa boards to the beach and they would set them up and they needed a paperweight basically because they're using a draw knife to rough shape the boards, and that's a lot of drag, so they needed someone to sit on the board, and so that was my first job in the industry, or I say it was. My pay was at the end of the day, they'd go up and buy beer, and you'd sit around and burn the balsa chips and talk story after dark and drink beer. So, um, you know, coupled with the restaurant business, I got into making boards, fabricating boards. I learned to shape them, I learned to glass them, and I got into this, kind of grew with the surf industry as it grew. Um, as an offshoot, because I had some talent in composite work, I started building boats. In fact, I ended up working for a friend who had designed a boat called the Peacat, and it was a pretty unique boat, and he needed help, so I went to work for him, worked about 8 or 9 years for him, and learned to build boats, learned more about composites, learned to sail them better, got into racing, got into selling them, got into marketing and with boats. At the same time, I'm still dabbling in the surf industry, and then um, part of that, being a surfer and growing up around Santa Monica State Beach, was a kind of a gathering place for an eclectic group of people, and part of the group were a lot of film people, and so I met a lot of stunt guys, stunt people, and second unit directors and stuff. And so when the film Gidget came along and they needed a little person to, because there weren't very many little women that surfed, I ended up doubling for Sandra Dee in the first Gidget. And of course my line is, I used to look good in a bikini, but now my skin is wrinkled and my tits are sagging. So that's my line. Anyway, so that was a summer of work, and I'm married, and I've got kids, and I've got, I was able to get in SAG, and which was hard to do because it was expensive, and you had to have a job, a real job in the industry. So I got into some stunt work, and I actually doubled for Mickey Rooney in a series, same name, same height, a little different shape, but and he was a really good. He was a real good athlete, and I'd never done fights or falls or any of that. And I signed on to the original um, thing as an expert water skier, which I'd never done in my life. And luckily, a friend had a water ski boat, and he took me out a couple hours and showed me the basics. And so I hired on as an expert and did this stunt job doubling Mickey Rooney, and actually it was very interesting. I won't bore you with that whole thing, but I did get into it and did get work sporadically over the years. I couldn't deal with Hollywood, driving into Hollywood, because I got to be in the water instead. And so, and I got into, so I'm working for this friend of mine building catamarans, and the whole time I'm collecting sort of boxes of fittings, and I got enough stuff here to build a boat. Of course, I never used any of it, but I ended up building my own boat, a 32-foot catamaran. It took me 7 years to build it and launch it, and actually launched it from this beach, like right next door, on the other side of that big house, and uh, and that took most of my adult life modifying that, and out of that, because I had that experience when Dennis Connors was, his back was against the wall, and the New Zealanders had found a flaw in the America's Cup charter. Uh, they challenged the U.S., and we had to meet the challenge or lose the cup. And so basically Dennis handed a friend of mine who builds boats a blank check and said, you know, spend it, we want the hottest boat. So in '88 we built two 60-foot catamarans that actually became the prototypes for the last foil-borne cats in the last America's Cup. And so I worked on that. It was 24/7 for 7 months. The first 3.5 months we started from scratch. Worked again 24 hours a day, and built two 60-foot cats delivered to San Diego, and they needed backup crew and support crews, so I went down for that and spent another 3 months down there working on those boats and the backup crew for Dennis. So I got to sail with him a lot and sail. He kept one of the boats after the Cup, and I sailed like 6 or 7 Ensenada races with him. So one of the best sailors in the world. I don't claim to be a great sailor, but anyway, it was a real privilege. So, and because of surfing and being kind of there as it's growing, I got to travel a lot of the world and surf a lot of, experience a lot of different cultures and a lot of different breaks, and that's a wonderful thing that I probably couldn't have afforded to do, but was able to do it at that time. So I just kind of got on the backside of the 100-pound surfboards when they were balsa redwood planks, basically varnished and cumbersome, not easy to surf. And my first board was this paddle board, which was a hollow plywood lifeguard rescue board called a Surf King Junior, and a bitch to ride, and it was weighed as much as I did, but I managed to get out on it and catch waves and kept going with it. And then I got the real board from Joe Quigg in the winter of '50, and that was balsa wood covered with fiberglass. Well, at the time, there were some surfers that were working at Douglas Aircraft, and they were kind of the first ones to start using polyester resin and fiberglass as a covering, and it turns out that that worked really well. So, they're working with fiberglass and resin, and they would abscond with some of the materials, and they started working on boards with it. Um, and that was a huge change in surfboards and surfboard design. You could make them lighter and stronger, and consequently, it allowed more people to surf comfortably, if you will. A lot of people say the Gidget movie was one that changed the industry. Maybe it's certainly, um, you could look at it two ways. It helped it, yeah, but also it hurt it because, more surfers than waves, and you know what that leads to. So, um, yeah, so over the years, boards got lighter and stronger and shorter, narrower, more maneuverable. One of the ways I kind of describe that part of the era in the mid 60s through the 70s, all of the premier point breaks and reef breaks were taken up with very crowded with expert local surfers, and which meant that anyone beginning or intermediate were pushed out to the edges. Well, they went out to the edges and started riding beach breaks that we didn't really have to ride, and consequently the industry, because there were so many people there on the edges, if you will, surfboard design kind of went out to complement them, and point breaks, you take off in a wave, and it's bullfighting terminology. You come as close to the horns as possible without dying. You want to put yourself in as much jeopardy as you can, but still make the wave. Well, a beach break, it's inevitable. It's going to close out, and the object became how many maneuvers can you get before that happens. So boards changed, styles changed. Longboards started to come back in. Shortboards were predominant, and I was lucky enough to judge a surf competition in Baja, Mexico, and some of the best surfers in the world, both longboarders and shortboarders, were invited to it. One of them was Kelly Slater when he was like 14 or 15 or something. Warm water, warm air, warm people, plenty of waves. Everybody's going off. It was an incredible competition, and up to that point, let's say there were the two factions, the point break riders or the reef riders, and the shore break or beach break riders. In the finals of that competition, Kristen Fletcher and Kelly Slater. Waves were great. Christian is just doing phenomenal airs and doing all this stuff, but he wasn't really completing the dance, where Kelly could put it all together. Wasn't going quite as high, not quite as tricky, but he put it all together. So I think Kelly was the point in time where he brought it all together, and surfboard design followed that, and technology followed that, and of course, he's proving today he's still right there at the very, very top. So along comes SUP. It'd been practiced in Hawaii for I don't know how many years. I had never really seen it. I go to Malibu on one of the biggest swells in years. I'm paddling out on my belly and watching, and it's 100 aggressive surfers out there, all taking off, and I'm waiting for that opportunity. I'm kind of dragging my feet, not wanting to get out there in the cluster, and along comes this wave that everybody falls on or whatever happened, right? And I turn around and I take off and I'm riding down the line. I hear behind you, and I look behind me and it's Laird. Where the hell did you come from? I sorry, and I pull out and I wait for him to finish the wave and paddle out. And I know him, so we're talking, and I'd never seen anybody stand up paddle. He's on a 45-pound tandem board, and he's taken off from the second point, made it all the way through the first point, through all the chaos, and I didn't think anybody had a prayer in hell making it to where I was. So, during the day of surfing, I asked him about, what size paddle and how, what's the deal, how you doing this, what's going on, and so he explained what he could. That day, Laird went through the pier twice. I'd never seen anybody ride through that pier in over 50 years of surfing there. I was so impressed that I came home that night and fumbled around in the dark and found a kayak paddle I had, and I cut it off and I mixed some epoxy and glued a broomstick cross handle on it so I could use it the next day. And I had a 12-foot board that I had designed for Surf Tech, a molded board that was big enough for me to stand up paddle on. So I brought it down here, right to this beach. Surf's still big, it's almost double overhead out here. It's not easy to ride. And I, stand up on this board first time and paddle out, and it took me about an hour. I finally caught a wave, but I was frustrated. It was much harder than I thought it would be. And I finally came in and I threw the paddle on the beach and paddled back out and went surfing. But that's what got me started in it. And a few months later, a friend sent me a paddle, like a real paddle, like a carbon paddle, and that changed my whole thing on stand-up paddling, because the paddle is the real tool that not only propels you, but it's a foil when you're surfing. And so that got me into it. And the same time, my wife is a real athlete, great swimmer, great runner, and all-around athlete, water person. She started paddling, and she got into it big time. And so it's something that we've been able to do together and really have fun doing. And so, along comes Sparky Longley, who gets into it, Rainbow Sandals, and he and Jerry get together and go, well, let's have a real battle here. Let's have the paddle of the battle, or the battle of the paddle, or whatever it is, right? And kind of no rules, and let's go for it. So, I've known Sparky for 50 years, and got into not only competing in it, but I get to be a referee. I get to put on a striped shirt and go out and go surf all day, which I love. Okay, the Fountain of Youth. Luckily, I got invited to go on an Indonesian trip with Yvonne Chenard and the Patagonia crew. We're on a 60-foot all-steel ketch, sails up, 1,000 horsepower diesel engine. We're coming around one of the islands. We've been surfing a break called Scar Reef. Gnarly break. Anybody that hangs out there very long, they got scars all over them. But we're going around to reputedly one of the best surf breaks in the world, which is Desert Point. It's the middle of the night. We're reaching in trade wind. We're coming around the island. It takes us 4 hours to go the next 4.5 miles because of the current. So there's this tremendous current running around the island. Now picture Desert Point. We're anchored inside the point sticking out. You've got waves coming unimpeded from Antarctica. So they come wheeling around the point like spokes on a bicycle. You've got a 10-knot current running straight into the wave face. And it's a way easier takeoff than Scar Reef, but it's a growing wave. As it comes in and goes down that reef, it gets bigger and gnarlier and hollower and more radical. You've got a reef that's knee-high, dry out of the water with all this current and all the water rushing off that reef. We get there, it only breaks at a certain tide. When we get there, it doesn't look like it's going to break at all. In 3 hours, it's now almost double overhead. So we've got it. So I paddle out, get a bunch of waves, and I take off on probably the best wave I've ever been in. Barrel, anyway. Double overhead, just cranking wave. And I'm I don't go left that often. I only go left if I have to, but I had to then. So, unbeknownst to me, Yvonne is standing on the reef, on the dry reef. His board's broken in 3 halves, in 3 pieces. He's got the tail with the fins on it and his leash on tucked under his arm. And he's wondering what the hell to do, because here comes this wave that's going to break on, looks like it's going to break on the reef, right? So at the last second, he dives off and trailing this piece of board, and I'm in this wave fully focused going, I don't think I can make it, but I got to go for it. That's all you can do, or die. Oh my God, I'm going to hit a turtle. Well, it wasn't a turtle, it was the tail of Yvonne's board. So I make it down this thing way further than I ever thought I could, 100 yards down the beach, and finally drive through the top of the wave. I don't die. I come out with this shit-eating grin on my face. I'm just, yeah, I don't need to ride another wave in my life, right? So I paddle back to the boat. A couple months later, Yvonne calls me and says, hey, would you write a little piece for the catalog? So I got thinking about it, and I got thinking about my elation and how I felt after that wave. And I described this whole, set up my little article with describing the point and the current and just the whole setup and the illusion of speed, because speed is really an illusion. You walk at 5, you run at 10, you drive your car at 80, and you get in a plane and go 600, but it's all about illusion. It can either feel fast or slow. Time slows down or speeds up. So I got thinking about it, and I got, okay, Einstein theorized that if you and I are standing here on the beach and you get picked up by a spaceship and you can leave here and exceed the speed of light, then when you come back, you would land younger than when you left. I theorized in that barrel the illusion of speed and the whole setup, the whole thing with the noise and the wind and the current and the whole visual part of it. The illusion of speed was so great. I exceeded the speed of light. I came out physically, chemically, different than when I went in. I came out younger. Surfing is the fountain of youth.